What's up, shitheads? It is Monday, November 29th, which means it is officially Duggar Trial Week in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So I'm going to be completely honest with y'all. There's another podcast episode that I am not done editing that discusses all of the motions and bullshit that was set to go on today in the court hearing. Now, I am not done editing that podcast, so it's not posted yet. However, I promised the shithead community that I would attend trial, take notes, record the notes, and post them as quick as possible, even if it sounded ridiculous, so that y'all had the tea firsthand as it was happening. And even though I am incredibly OCD and it's going to drive me batshit crazy to have the episodes posted out of order, I promised you guys, and that promise is more important than my OCD bullshit. Disclaimer for the record, I took notes as fast as my midget hands and T-Rex arms could glide across the page. That being said, this is not going to be a 100% accurate representation of every single word and every single thing that went down today. I'm going to be reading you guys my notes as I took them to the best of my ability. Here we go. Bobby Holt is sworn in. Here we go. Bobby Holt admits that her daughter and Josh were dating in 2003, and her daughter he was dating was Kaylee Holt. Did Josh Duggar tell you that he thought this would end their relationship? And what they mean is, did they think that discussing the molestation would end the relationship between Josh and Kaylee? She says that Jim Bob did. Defense tries to argue since Jim Holt was an elder, the conversation was privileged. Prosecution argues since women are not allowed to be elders, and since multiple people were there, it was not privileged communication. They were there as parents of Kaylee, not there in a church capacity. Judge Brooks admits Bobby Holt's testimony. Rules of evidence don't give clergy privileged communication exception, preliminary ruling. Brooks points out that the previous rulings point out that the privileged communication exception applies to private communication, not conversational communication outside of spiritual conversations in a private matter. Brooks says this conversation in question was in a private home as family friends in the context of this dating relationship, not as context in a church capacity where the clergy exception would apply. Also, an elder is not a priest. The privileged communication which extends to an elder is waived by the fact multiple people were present for this conversation. Preliminary finding, judge rules the testimony in. So here we go. Prosecution, what did Josh Duggar tell you about sexually touching minor females? Defense objects, saying hearsay, and the judge asked her to rephrase. Prosecution, what did Josh Duggar tell you March 30th, 2003 about touching minor females? Holt. Jane Doe 4 he touched during Bible time, and that he touched Jane Doe 1 through 3 previously. Prosecution, when did Josh tell you about touching Jane Doe 4? Holt. He said happened that day that he touched her vaginal area over the clothes with his hands. And there's kind of some mumbling that I noted, like there was other stuff said, but it wasn't during this time period. So anyways, prosecution. He's over 3 years older than Jane Doe 4. Yes. Prosecution. He admits he touched other minor females. Holt. Yes. Prosecution. Did he tell you how long he'd been doing this? Holt. Since he was 12 years old. Prosecution. Who did Josh admit to touching? Holt. Jane Doe 1 through 3. Prosecution asked what he said he confessed to doing to Jane Doe 1. Holt says he touched her breast and vaginal area over the clothes. Prosecution asked more than once, and Holt says, I can't remember. Prosecution asked about what happened with touching Jane Doe 2, and Holt says the same as Jane Doe 1. And the prosecution asked about if he used his hands. The prosecution asked about Jane Doe number 3, and Holt says, same as Jane Doe number 1 and Jane Doe number 2 with hands. Prosecution. Give the court context of when. Holt. Jane Doe 1 through 3 were all sometimes sleeping and sometimes awake. Prosecution, did he state he touched them on multiple occasions? Holt, yes. I clearly missed the next question, and Holt says, February 2002, he had touched Jane Doe number 1, and she went and told her parents. And then Josh confessed. Prosecution, did he continue to touch after this in 2002? Holt, I don't know. Prosecution, March 30th, 2003, he touched Jane Doe number 4. Holt, yes. Prosecution, March 30th, 2003, would all victims have been 3 years younger than Josh Duggar? Holt, yes. Prosecution asked when Josh's birthday is, and Holt says that it's March 3rd, 1988. Prosecution, did Josh tell you anything else that day? Holt, yes, but not involving the girls. Prosecution, someone else, not a sister? Holt, yes. Girl was not 3 years younger than Josh. So now this is Holt talking, and she says, January 2005 through March or April of 2005, we were in Little Rock at our home, and he stayed with us. We were in Little Rock because we were in session, and it says husband was state senator. So she was basically saying they were in session at the time, so they were living in Little Rock, and Josh went to Little Rock to live with them. Prosecution, why did he stay with y'all? Holt, hoping the kids would get married and be able to help him. In 2005, were you an elder, and were you at the same church as the Duggars? I could not hear her answer here. Prosecution, did you hope Josh and Kaylee could work stuff out and still get married? Holt, yes, we love Josh. Prosecution, with Josh, this convo was just you and Josh. Holt, yes. Prosecution, no church roll. Holt, no. Prosecution, tell the court what Josh said that night. Holt, explaining March 30th, 2003, with Jane Doe number 4, it was Bible time and she was in his lap and then there's silence. And so you can tell she's visibly upset. And prosecution says, there's tissues behind you if you need it. Holt clearly sounds like she's crying, says, thank you, I'm sorry. Prosecution tells her to take her time, and she pulls herself together and she continues. He put his hands under her clothes and panties and touched her vagina. I asked him if he just touched or put his fingers inside her vagina. He said yes, he did. Prosecution, did he tell you anything in regards to Jane Doe number 1? The defense objects due to hearsay, and she is asked to rephrase the question. Prosecution, did Josh tell you what Jane Doe number 1 did? Holt, he said he went to her while she was sleeping. He went under the blanket to touch her, and she hit him. He told me she snitched on him. Prosecution, did Josh tell you anything else about touching Jane Doe number 1 through 4? Holt, I don't think so. Not that I remember. Prosecution, did your husband go with Jim Bob and Josh to see the cop? Holt, yes. Objection, hearsay. And that's upheld. So I wrote a note that she obviously can't discuss what her understanding is of her husband, Jim Bob and Josh, going to the police department or to the police officer, which we already all know this story, because she's not directly related there, so that would be hearsay. They passed the witness, and now the defense is up. So the defense says, you and I have never spoken. Holt says correct. Defense, investigator came to speak with you and you declined to speak. Holt, correct. Defense, you testify your families went to the same church. Holt, correct. Defense, non-denominational church. And then he says something about 1999, the church was started by Clark Wilson. Holt says, I think so. Defense, you were all members of the church at the same time. I think she said yes, but I can't really see what my handwriting's fucking atrocious. Good God. Okay. Defense, your husband's an elder. Holt, yes. Defense, is Jim Bob an elder too? Holt, yes. Defense, the church met at homes. Holt, sometimes. Defense. In 2003, was there a church building? And Holt says no. Defense. So all met at houses for church. Holt says yes, and you can already tell where they're going with this, but let me tell you right now, it gets so much worse than I expected. But here we go. Back to the notes. The defense asks if her husband is an ordained Baptist minister. She says yes. And if he's an ordained chaplain. She says, I don't think so at that time. Defense. But he is now. Holt. Yes. Defense. He performed counseling. Holt. Not with the church. He's unofficial. Defense. He isn't licensed. Holt. That's correct. Defense. He counsels as a chaplain. Holt. That's correct. Defense. This is a home church, as you put it. Holt. Yes. Defense. How many families in this church in 2002? Holt says, I don't know. 8. Defense says small. Holt says yes. Defense. You understand what he did as an elder. Holt. Yes. Defense. It's a religious function. Holt. I'm not sure it's a function. Defense. He did religious things and counseled, not licensed. Holt. Yes. Defense. People came to your husband for counseling. Holt. I can't remember. Defense. Kids dated. They're the same age. November 2002, March 30th to 2003. They were boyfriend and girlfriend during this time. And they were chaperoned. Holt. Yes. Defense. They were interested in each other. Holt. Yes. Defense. March 2003. Jim Bob Duggar called your husband to initiate this conversation. Holt. Yes, Michelle did too. Defense. So his parents to your husband. Holt. It was on speaker and they knew that I could hear. Defense. They called a meeting. Holt. Wouldn't call it a meeting. Defense. Just the 5 of you were present, minor with parents, plus your husband and you. Holt. Correct. Defense. Confidentiality grounds were their rules. Holt says that she does not remember. Defense. Is it your testimony that there may have been ground rules for confidentiality? Holt. I just don't remember. Not saying that there weren't any. I'm just saying that I don't remember. Defense. You claim my client made statements to you. Holt. Yes, about those 2 people, but more over the time. Defense. What Josh said to you was in that home. Holt. Yes. Defense. Prayers were said. Holt. Yes. Defense. The Bibles were open. Holt. Don't remember. Defense. Did this have religious undertones to this meeting? Holt. I don't remember. Defense. Jim Holt was providing advice. Holt. We both were giving advice. Defense. You were never present with your husband during religious meetings. Holt. This wasn't a religious function. Defense. Y'all both gave religious advice. I couldn't hear. There's multiple people talking. Holt. I don't think he counseled any females with church. Defense. You were there. Holt. With females outside the church. Yes, I was there. Defense. This is well known to Duggars. Holt. I don't know. Defense. Despite being best friends for 30 plus years. Holt. I really don't know. Defense. Where did y'all gather at the Duggars? Holt. Jim, Bob, and Michelle's bedroom. I was in the chair by Josh. Josh was in the floor. Defense. Can't hear. Holt. He told us what he did. Defense. You remember exactly what Josh said 18 plus years later. Holt. Yes. Defense. Jane Doe number 4 was sitting in lap during Bible time. What did he say he did? Holt. Said touched her inappropriately in private areas. Defense. Over the clothes. Holt. Correct. Defense. Jane Doe 1 through 3. What did you claim he said? Holt. He touched breast and vaginal. And then she basically says that vagina wasn't the exact word he used. He might have used the word bottom, but she doesn't know what exact word he used for vagina. Defense. What words? Holt. Don't remember specific term. Defense. So you don't remember. I do remember. I don't remember the term for vagina area. Defense. Jane Doe, number 1, 2, and 3, he said what? Holt. That he touched their breast and vaginal area over the clothes. Then she says that he said, I went under her dress and grabbed her breast. Defense. 2005, you gave broad dates, but testified that this was when your family was in Little Rock. Holt. They were dating but still into each other. Defense. Relationship status. Defense. You invited Josh to stay with you. Holt. Yes. Defense. Giving him the opportunity to confess to temptation. Holt. Yes. Defense. Confession is religious. Holt. No. I'm confessing now. This is not religious. Defense. But you wanted to give spiritual guidance. Holt. We gave him an opportunity to confess if he wanted to. Defense. You communicated to Duggars that this was why he could stay. Holt. Not to them. We told him he could talk to us. Defense. Who was present? Josh, Jim Holt, me in our bedroom. Defense. No one else. Holt. Correct. Defense says Jim Holt fell asleep, and then Holt says while Jane Doe number 4 was on his lap for Bible time, he went under her clothes and touched her vagina. I asked if he touched or entered. He said he did both. I went to tell Jim Bob and Michelle, but they didn't want to hear it. Defense. Did you tell anyone? Holt. During this time frame, no. Defense. Did that change later? Holt. Yes. Defense. You told Duggars and husband what happened? Holt. Yes. Defense. Did you tell anyone else outside of that circle? Holt. Yes. Defense. When? Holt. Well, something else happened that made Josh leave our home. I repeat, she said. Something else happened that made Josh leave our home. Defense. Did you write notes? Holt. No, don't think so. Defense. 2003, 2005. Was Clark present? Holt. No. It's redirected. So this is prosecution again. Prosecution. During the meeting in March 2003, did anyone ask you to leave? Holt says, not that I remember. Prosecution says, did they say that this was privileged communication, private conversation? Holt says, no. Prosecution says, did they ask you to step out? Holt says, no. Prosecution, Josh called you Aunt Bobby. Holt says, yes. Prosecution, did you talk to other Duggar children? Objection, hearsay, overruled. Yes. Prosecution, y'all were best friends, correct. Holt, yes. Prosecution, defense asked you if 100% disclosed, but Josh gave more details in 2005 in the 2005 conversation. Prosecution, the defense asked about religious undertones. Do you pray before meals, during the day, blah, blah, blah? Just basically, do you pray all the time? Does praying make it religious? Holt, no. Prosecution, confession, is that a religious concept? Holt, yes. Prosecution, can it be moral and religious? Just because someone confesses, does that make it religious? Holt, no. Prosecution, they asked how you knew Josh meant vaginal area. Holt, he said that, but used a different word for vagina, for vagina area. I can't remember the word. Prosecution, were there any discrepancies? Holt, no. In 2005, something more happened that made people aware. Objection, scope. Judge Brooks, I don't know what happened, so I can't speak to the scope. Go forward with the questioning if it's in the scope. Prosecution, did it involve inappropriate touching? Holt, repeat. Prosecution, was the event in 2005 that made people aware involved touching a minor? Holt, no. Prosecution, you have never been an elder. Holt, no. It's a man in the church. Prosecution, as elder, did your husband have duties you couldn't attend? Holt, yes. Prosecution, were you allowed to attend conversations in 2002 and 2005? Holt, yes. The witness is then excused. And Jim Bob Duggar is then called to take the big seat. And just side note here, it went worse than I even expected it to go. Here we go. Judge Brooks tells Duggar to step forward. He's sworn in, all that good shit. He takes his seat. Good morning. State your name and spell your name for the court. He does all that shit. Prosecution. Are you the father of Josh Duggar? Yes. Do you have other kids? Yes. How long have you been married? 30-something odd years. He knew the exact date, but I wasn't, Prosecution. How long have you lived here? Jim Bob. I was born here. Michelle came here when she was around 4. Prosecution, 2003 to 2005, did y'all live in Springdale? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, explain the layout of the house. Jim Bob asked, the house then. No fucking shit. Anyways. Prosecution, 2003 home on Johnson Road. Jim Bob, it was 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. Prosecution, 2002, how many kids did you have? Jim Bob says 2002, 15. Prosecution, for a 3-bedroom home, Jim Bob. We had 4 bedrooms originally, and I made 1 girl's bedroom and 1 boy's bedroom. Prosecution. But then you moved to a different home. Jim Bob, correct. Started building in 2002, so moved in 2016. Prosecution. You mean 2005, 2006. Jim Bob. Yes, 2005, probably 2006. Prosecution. When Josh came to talk, did you live at the Johnson Road house or the new house? So then, Jim Bob says Johnson Road, and I want to say that for a boy to come forward, and he keeps talking about how courageous it is for Josh to come confess to him or some bullshit, but the prosecution's like, Mr. Duggar, answer my question. Mr. Duggar, answer my question. Finally, he got his ass in trouble. So then Judge Brooks comes to the scene, and he's like, Mr. Duggar, objections will be made when needed. Skirt, skirt. So the prosecution says, refer to the victims by the screen, names and numbers. Basically, there's something he's looking at, and they're saying, don't say the victim's name. Just respond to my questions by the number that corresponds with their name. The prosecution says, do you remember doing an interview with Megyn Kelly? He says yes. Prosecution, do you remember speaking about what Josh did? Objection, no grounds. It gets overruled. Prosecution, do you remember the conversation with Kelly about touching Jane Doe number 1 through 4? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, is it then that Josh came to you in 2002 to disclose touching minors? Jim Bob, correct. Prosecution, what did he tell you? Jim Bob, told me touched some of the girls on breast over clothes and they didn't wake up. Prosecution, with chart, who did he touch? Jim Bob, 1 through 4, I think. Prosecution, in 2002, Jim Bob, I don't know the time frame, but around then. Prosecution, the first time Josh told you, is that exactly what he told you? Jim Bob, I don't remember exactly. Prosecution, what did he say? Jim Bob, I don't remember. Prosecution, but a minute ago you said that he told you that he touched some of the girls on the breast over the clothes and they did not wake up. Jim Bob, that's not exactly how he said it, but yes. Prosecution, what did you do? Jim Bob, that was 18 or 19 years ago, so don't remember exactly. But glad he told us or we wouldn't have known. Eventually ended up calling elders. Prosecution, stop. Stop you there. After he told you he touched the girls, did you take action to prevent it? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, you believed he told you the truth. Or you believed what he told you. Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, he came again after those measures were in place. Jim Bob, yes, another. Prosecution, when? Jim Bob, I don't know. Then he gets in trouble again because he keeps talking. And I literally couldn't even write it down quick enough, but basically he's just on his bullshit, per usual. He's trying to talk over and tell whatever he wants to tell, spin it however he wants to spin it. That's my personal opinion, and personal opinion of what I observed. But you fucking know. Anyways, prosecution. What did Josh Duggar tell you? Jim Bob, I don't remember. Prosecution, you don't remember. Jim Bob, no, I told you he did touching. I just don't remember exactly. Then the judge says for them not to talk over each other. Prosecution. What do you remember? Jim Bob. That he touched the breast when sleeping. Don't remember which one. Prosecution. Do you remember touching vaginal area? Jim Bob. No. Prosecution. You don't remember. Jim Bob. No. Prosecution. Remember talking to an investigator in 2006? Jim Bob. We did eventually talk to police, and Jim Holt recommended he confess everything. I don't remember if police report was made or not. Prosecution. Well, do you remember talking to child services? Remember telling them that someone was sitting in his lap and he touched their vaginal area? Jim Bob. Don't remember. I didn't write the police report. That was years ago. Prosecution. May I approach? And there's some silence. Okay, they're taking up the shit up there. Whatever. Jim Bob. If you're using an In Touch magazine tabloid, I'm not allowing that. This is not a joke. He actually said, I am not allowing that. So, being able to refrain while sitting in a courtroom is a practiced gift, I guess. And so is being able to put your face inside your shirt neck. Okay, anyway, so he says that he's not allowing that. And Judge Brooks says, she is showing you a document and then asking questions. I'm controlling this. You will answer questions asked. Objections will be made when proper. Mic drop. Jim Bob, yes, correct. Prosecution, ask a question. Defense objects, it's sustained. Prosecution asked Jim Bob to read directly what he said in the police report, because he's claiming he doesn't remember what's in the police report, so she says, here's the police report, fucking read exactly what you said. Jim Bob said he will not do that. He says he will not read what he is written to have said in the police report. There's an objection, and it says she can do XYZ. She wants him to read. No, that's not appropriate. There's silence. Jim Bob, I don't know. I didn't write that police report. Get them here and ask them. Prosecution, did Josh tell you he touched John Doe's vagina? Jim Bob, I really don't remember. Jim Bob, it's been many, many years. Judge, there is no question on the table. So here's what happened. Jim Bob won't shut the fuck up. He keeps talking because he wants to be in control of the narrative, but he's not getting asked the questions that he wants to answer. He's not being able to run the show. So he just goes on this tirade out of nowhere about it's been many, many years, and the judge is like, there's no question on the table, so you should not be talking. So Jim Bob says, okay. Prosecution, did he tell you he touched their breast? Jim Bob, that's all I recall. Prosecution, this was a big event to you. Jim Bob, I don't recall. Prosecution, do you recall doing an interview in 2015 with Kelly? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, do you recall saying something happened in 2003 to pull Josh from the home? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, why? Jim Bob, Holt worked at Piney Ridge with Clark Wilson and Jim. Prosecution, stop. Stop you right there. Jim Bob, well. Prosecution, do you remember telling Megan that it was the third time that Josh came to you that you did something? He doesn't answer. I didn't catch an answer. Prosecution, Jane Doe 4, you pulled him from the house after something with Jane Doe 4. You don't remember what happened to pull your kid from your home. You don't remember what happened to Jane Doe 4 that led you to pull your kid from your home. Jim Bob, I don't remember word for word. We talked to Holt and Clark and Wilson and talked about what to do. Piney Ridge, prosecution, stop. Jim Bob, prosecution, what did Josh Duggar tell you in 2003 to have that conversation? Jim Bob, inappropriate touching of girls. Prosecution, what did he tell you he did specifically? Jim Bob, inappropriate touching of breast. And I'll say this, Child Services said that this would be confidential, and this is so unprofessional of you. You are so unprofessional. Prosecution, do you understand why we are here? The defense objects. They said this is not a debate, and Judge Brooks says to Jim Bob, I understand that this is a difficult and unfair situation, and I'm sorry, but you need to answer the questions with no side comments. So he has to tell him again to shut the fuck up. They pass the witness, and the defense gets up there. Good morning. The prosecution was asking you a lot of questions with 2002 to 2005 time period. Jim Bob, yes. Defense, long time ago. Jim Bob, yes. 18 or 19 years ago. Defense, what church were you a part of? Jim Bob, Clark started a small church in a trailer and then moved to houses. Defense, name of the church. Jim Bob, Bible Grace Fellowship. That could be fucking wrong, but that's what I thought I heard. Or that's what I wrote down or think my handwriting says. Defense, and you were members with Holt. Jim Bob, yes, many years. Defense, church elders. Jim Bob, yes, and wives were spiritual leaders. Defense, you've known Holt a long time. Jim Bob, yes, since the 7th grade. Defense, did you know he was a minister and chaplain at Piney Ridge? Jim Bob, yes, and knew worked with kids that sexually violated. Defense, you sought guidance from Holt. Jim Bob, correct. Defense, for religious purposes. Jim Bob, yes, since he came and told us he was at the age of curiosity and hormones, so we got Clark and Holt to come counsel him since they were close friends. So just want to, again, he is trying to defend him by saying that he's at the age of curiosity and hormones. So anyways, back to this. Defense, you're his father and he was a minor. Jim Bob, yes. Defense, so you thought religious conversation. Jim Bob, yes, they were church leaders at church and a chaplain, so wanted guidance. Defense, Megan Kelly, did you tell Kelly that you got spiritual guidance, spiritual counseling? Jim Bob, I don't remember, but we did, not just with Holt, but with all of our kids. Defense, did you in fact get spiritual counseling with Holt? Jim Bob, yes. Defense, what did that include? Jim Bob, going to their house for counseling. Jim was a counsel. Bobby was good, went for them to counsel him. Defense, asked about what Josh said to you. Jim Bob, he was trying to do, I don't know what the fuck happened here. Defense, you don't remember word for word. Jim Bob, no. Then there's silence. Defense, one more question, was it your expectation that Holt's conversation would be confidential as Christians? Objection. Defense, was it your expectation to be confidential? And he said yes. Brooks, objection. Be overruled. Let's not elicit hearsay. So, yes, Brooks tells him to not elicit hearsay. Okay, defense, did you ask them to keep it confidential? Jim Bob says yes. No further questions, and he is passed back to the prosecution. Prosecution, it's your testimony he counseled with Holt individually. Jim Bob, I think was both at their house. Clark was first, then Holt and Holt, there on out. Prosecution, spiritual leader is not always an elder. Jim Bob, there can be Holt joint elders, official elders, we made church decisions. Prosecution, again, can spiritual leaders also not be elders of the church? Jim Bob, well, a lot of the time. Prosecution, but not a pastor. Jim Bob, but we are all called to be pastors. I about lost my fucking shit. Jim Bob says we're all called to be pastors. Okay, we'll come back to that. Prosecution, are you a spiritual leader? Jim Bob, I'm an elder. Prosecution, can you have spiritual leaders who are not elders? Jim Bob, in that church. Prosecution, your wife and Bobby Holt were spiritual leaders. Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, they had voting rule in the church. Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, could they have been a pastor? Jim Bob, could have, but weren't paid. Prosecution, in your church. Jim Bob, Clark and Jim were paid. I wasn't paid, but then the prosecution says, was Bobby Holt paid? Jim Bob says, I don't know. I think she was reimbursed for expenses. Prosecution, your testimony is that he went to counseling, but not that you remember him touching a vagina. Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, so you remember all of this, but not that Josh touched the vagina of Jane Doe number 4. Jim Bob, have we met before, or have we talked before? Something about have the two of them had a discussion before. Prosecution, have you talked to defense counsel before? Jim Bob, yes. Prosecution, but declined to speak with counsel before today. Jim Bob, I don't understand. Prosecution, did you decline to talk to prosecutors before today? Jim Bob, well, Homeland Security said they had a subpoena for me, so I went to get it, but I did not talk to anyone. Brooks asked Jim Bob, who was a pastor, again, Judge Brooks. Jim Bob, instead of pastors, we had 3 elders, Clark, me, and Holt. Brooks, so leadership never called a specific person to be head pastor. Jim Bob, Clark moved on, and it was just me and Holt. Brooks, while y'all had full-time jobs. Jim Bob, we all did. Brooks, the work y'all were doing for the church was on the side. Not full-time. Jim Bob, it was full-time on Sunday. And during the week, we took care of other people. Judge Brooks, 2002 to 2003 church did not have a pastor preacher. Jim Bob, it did. 3 called elders. Brooks, you use elders synonymously with pastor. Jim Bob, yes. So you're saying that Holt and Clark and you are all the elders. Jim Bob, with our wives. Prosecution, you didn't state Bobby Holt. Jim Bob says again, and our wives. Move on. That was Brooks, obviously. Because the argument is whether or not women can be elders, and it's clear that they can't, but he's saying that they can, because it's us and our wives. So after Brooks says moves on, Jim Bob, we all work as one. And Brooks says, did they vote? And he's meaning the women. Jim Bob says yes. Brooks says, so on elder votes, did 6 votes come in? And Jim Bob says, as couples, they decided matters. So Brooks says, 3 or 6 votes total. And Jim Bob says, depends on the matter. So Brooks says, what does it depend on? And Jim Bob says, maybe one person, maybe where to meet, maybe all 6 of us vote. Clearly everyone's done with his bullshit at this point in time. So Jim Bob says, I appreciate you, Judge. Am I free to leave? And the judge says yes. The judge asks if the prosecution has the next witness. No. Defense, no. So they go into motions. Okay, so for motions, defense says that they have some outstanding issues about adequate evidence and prior molestation admission. So they get into this 15-day notice. And they say 15-day notice is rules. We have done that. Did so in discovery March of 2021. The rule is to disclose evidence, which we did. So by putting it in discovery plus the motions we filed, we have done so on multiple times, multiple fronts. The defense repeatedly admitted to touching and penetrating a minor. Defense argues that it's so old that no one will remember, but that's not valid because some people clearly do remember the incidents. And then it says evidence show multiple admissions, very clear what he did, and that what he did constitutes rape in the state of Arkansas. He quotes rules 414B1F, touching as minors, genitalia. What did I write here? Oh, defendant not only touched, but penetrated a minor. That constitutes rape and meets rape statute. The relevance of why that should be admitted here is clear. The prejudice can be dealt with through jury instructions. As far as clergy privilege communication goes, we can address that if needed. And then the defense gets up there and he says intent is important. That Jim Bob had the intent, and there are cases that talk about this, and he goes on to some bullshit. And then, alright, so then Judge Brooks in his bad self gets up here and says, paraphrasing what Duggar said today, his beliefs about the role of one's spirituality guiding every aspect of one's life, and that it extends to all decisions, given his testimony about the Holts being his best friends. Does this mean a person with deep beliefs in spirituality means all conversations they have are privileged? And the defense says, no, not all conversation is privileged. If this was about baseball, and he says something about the Cardinals, it's about the context. And Judge Brooks says, it does go to context. Defense. Jim Bob's intent matches Bobby Holt's statements. Brooks. If I call my best friend, who I'm in church with, does that protect all of my conversations with my best friend? Defense. Religious privileged communication, you can have certain conversations that don't come out in a courtroom. This is the epitome of that. People where conversations could theoretically be privileged. Under 414, Jim Bob's testimony doesn't get the government there. Judge. With Jim Bob's testimony correct with touching and conversations with Bobby Holt. Defense. Point your attention to where it happened on the body, where the touching happened on the body. Brooks. I understand. Defense. It's where on the body for the purpose of evaluating if this comes in. Bobby Holt is the only one who argues. Brooks. Can a clergy privilege, if you go to a Catholic booth, that's kind of the ultimate priest privilege. If you walk out of confessional and go to a police department, does that waive the privilege? We wouldn't argue what went to police department was privileged, but you wouldn't call the priest to court. That's what the defense said. And then he points out state rules of evidence. Judge, what gives way to mandatory reporting versus laws of the clergy? And he says he doesn't know. So Brooks, are you aware of ways the person getting info has obligation to report voids protection in conversations? Defense. 404B, offering for propensity purposes, and it's banned for those purposes. Brooks, the defense has placed identity into an issue here, where part of defense is that the defendant was not the person logged in when the images were downloaded, and that it's someone else. If identity and motive and lack of intent, would that mean it could be entered for those reasons? So basically he's saying you're arguing it can't be let in for propensity, and he's saying, well, if they want to get it in because you're saying that it wasn't him that did it, and they're saying letting it in would identify a motive and also explain intent where the defense is arguing there was none, should it be let in? And by the way, Judge Brooks said it way better than I wrote it, but again, I'm in the middle of an intense hand cramp trying to get this all down. So he basically says, could it be let in for those reasons other than propensity? Defense. Not for 404B, to what extent is this relevant to not confuse a jury? This all happened 19 years ago. Juvenile, not connected. To some extent, courts are not generally reversed. 403 is important for 414. For that reason, it's become a rule. The burden is higher than simply saying it's relevant because it's relevant. Did Josh Duggar knowingly download the images? That's what the 2 counts of indictment are. There's a huge disconnect between saying Josh confessed to Bobby Holt and why 404 allows for it to be in case I haven't been clear enough, this is still the defense talking. The court cannot conflate specific allegations, alleged touching and penetration. They argue that the second-degree assault, which this isn't a trial about that. This isn't a trial about what happened in 2002-2003. Brooks. He requests a briefing on the clergy privilege as it applies here, and the briefing is to be no more than 5 pages, and it's to be submitted tomorrow by noon, and he doesn't think that they would get to evidence tomorrow anyways. It's more likely that would happen on Thursday, and court will continue to take motions until such time we can get order and don't reference these allegations to the jury. Later today, we will send out revisions for the preliminary jury instructions. And then he talks about there were some emails, something caught his attention in the emails, and he wants to readdress that. Do you concede that the government can prove internet commerce nexus? So that is the judge asking the defense. Do you agree that the prosecution can prove internet commerce nexus with the image of possessing and obtaining where it was done with the use of a computer or a computer sold through interstate commerce? Do you think that they get that? Would adding the second possession hook be appropriate? Then the judge asks if there's anything else, and they mention something about getting witnesses lined up and something about a delay until Thursday, and judge says it's safe to say if we go into Wednesday starting court, like if they can get voir dire, if they can get all the jury picked tomorrow and actually start shit on Wednesday. He's still saying he doesn't think evidence would really go into play until Thursday, and then he basically says we're going to go meet in chambers to discuss this, the end. Well, I mean, he called for a recess, but you know what I'm saying. They went to chambers and the show was over. And that's that. That was it for today. And so, again, these episodes might be boring to some of y'all because I'm not trying to make them fancy or funny or anything else. I am just reading you guys my barely legible chicken scratch of a handwriting, taking notes the best I can, and it is what it is. Take it or leave it. But we will pick back up where we left tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, November 30th, and that will be the official first day of trial. But I can pretty much say that I am predicting tomorrow to entirely be the voir dire process, aka picking a jury. And they have 120 prospective jurors. So, yeah. That's going to be super fun. Normally, voir dire process wouldn't bother me, but 120 fucking people, they are really anticipating everyone not wanting to be on this fucking jury, and I cannot blame them. So we will pick up kicking ass again tomorrow. See you guys then.